Good morning. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Friday, Yom Shishi and Erev Shabbos. Let's light up the darkness. First, I apologize for being a few minutes late. You know, when we were kids, right, you had a refrigerator, you had a dishwasher. They lasted for 30, 40, 50 years. Now these gadgets are all so smart, and it's those electronics that break down. So today we had a car battery die, and lights and buzzes and whistles, and stuff with our smart home was going on, and nonsense, just nonsense. Lights should just go on and off. Although I do appreciate, actually, having programmable lights is very nice for Shabbos, so that the lights go on when they, on the timers. But still, we had some issues today, and I apologize for being late. Yehuda, welcome. Yehuda in South Carolina, Bill in Missouri, Lorraine in Texas, Guy in Ohio, Gordo in Scotland, Renee in Renee in Kansas City. Bella in Florida, Shandora in the Bronx, Tom in PA, Melissa in Great Neck, Libby, you're in Florida, right? Am I right? Welcome. And over there, nobody's checking in on the YouTube side. Welcome, everybody. Okay, we got a good head start yesterday on page 68. We did all of 68A. And that enables us to do a double daf today, catch up a little bit. We're all well aware. We're running a few pages behind, quite a few pages behind the daf yomi schedule. Just very hard to catch up in Sanhedrin because there's such long and juicy dafs, as it were. But don't worry, we'll catch up. Pretty much in Makos is where I think we'll be able to make some real headway. The next track date. And I apologize again. It's just, we're releasing a movie this summer. There's so much going on. There will be other days. As a matter of fact, next week. So we're gonna teach the class on Purim. Why wouldn't we? Because Friday, a week from today, is Purim. Then the very complex, the halachas of Purim that goes into Shabbos because of the rules of having a Purim Suda. The Purim meal, the festive meal of Purim, but you can't have a big meal on Friday afternoon because that takes away from the honor of Shabbos. That's all really complicated, but we'll plan to have the class on Purim probably at noon. Tonight, not tonight, but tomorrow night, the clocks change, so we'll just be back to noon on Fridays, but not this week. Next week, on March 16th, I'll be in Boca Raton, Florida, where Guns N' Moses will be the closing film, but I think it's in the afternoon, in Del Rey. So people in Florida, if you can make it to Boca, look online for the Boca International Jewish Film Festival. Should be a really fun screening, and I'll be there for the Q&A. But the travel of that, I'm sure we won't have class on that Sunday and probably not that Monday either, so we'll miss another 2 days. I mean, these things are just going to keep coming up. I apologize. What can I do? I can only be in one place at a time. But don't worry. By the time of the Siyum, we'll certainly be caught up. We have 2 years still to go to catch up. So what's our class numbers today? This is the 1877th and the 1878th page of the Talmud. And that's out of 2,711. So, we're well past the 2/3 mark. At any rate, now we are in chapter 8 of Tractate Sanhedrin, the 24th volume of the Talmud. We open Mishna number 1, and we're going to be talking about very strange law in the Torah, the stubborn and rebellious son, the ben sorer umore. And what's strange about this law, first of all, it's probably never been applied, especially the way that the sages interpret it. It's just going to be impossible to have a situation where parents would actually bring their awful son to the court, and the judges would say, yeah, that is a really awful son. He's going to commit all kinds of crimes. Maybe he'll murder people. And so we're going to execute him now. Not for what he has done, other than his pattern of stubborn and rebellious behavior, but really because what we're afraid he will do in the future. And not only because he might hurt other people and we want to protect them, but because he'll bring so much sin upon himself that it's better that he leave this world now and enter his eternal life without so much, sin dragging him down and possibly causing him to lose his place in the world to come. The law is in the Torah. It is in the Torah, but the sages basically, with the rules around it, legislated it out of existence. That doesn't mean that we don't study it, right? So we're going to study exactly what it means and when it would apply and when it wouldn't apply, because like every other law, we need to understand and learn it. Just like the sacrifices haven't been brought since the temple was destroyed nearly 2,000 years ago, but we study the laws of the sacrifices very carefully and understand that, Renee in Indiana, thank you, I apologize. And we study them carefully so that we can distinguish between them. And in fact, our learning of the laws is the best that we can do to fulfill the laws. We can't bring sacrifices, but when we learn the sacrifices, it's the best that we can do. Prayer services replace the sacrifices, but we also read the laws of the sacrifices as part of prayer services. Likewise, here we're going to learn these laws as best that we can, even though, like I said, it's probably never been enforced. Okay. This is also going to be one of those sensitive days that are, not what I would choose to teach if I had people in my class for the first time. And there's always some people who are here for the first time. But again, we're not going to be the law of the land. According to Jewish law, the law of the land is the law of the land. People got married at much younger ages in the ancient world. So when you hear about children getting married, children having sex, it's like just makes no sense to us. But they're not talking about whether somebody committed statutory rape or whether somebody committed rape. Really what they're going to be talking about is, if a sexual act happened at that age, God forbid, what would be the technical outcome of that? We're not talking about the moral outcome and who should be punished or who shouldn't be punished. But like a girl, if she's below a certain age, even if she was raped, she wouldn't be considered a non-virgin because if she's that young, whatever that act was, it's not going to be considered intercourse. It doesn't mean it's permitted. It just means that it's not considered intercourse. Issues like that are going to come up today. Okay, 68b, chapter 8, Mishnah number 1. The Torah describes the punishment given to a son who steals money from his parents to eat a gluttonous meal of meat and wine in the company of lowly men. All right? He's on a bad path. If his parents bring him to court for this act, he is exhorted to desist, and he's punished with lashes. If he repeats the same misdeed and is again brought to court by his parents within the same 3-month period, then he is considered a stubborn and rebellious son, the ben sorer umore, and he is liable to receive the death penalty, which in this case is execution by stoning. Why was this law not included in the previous chapter, which was all about transgressions that are punishable by stoning? Because there's a lot of particularities. That's why we're in a new chapter. From when does the stubborn and rebellious son become liable to receive the death penalty imposed upon a stubborn and rebellious son? Right? Who qualifies for this? Minors are not obligated in the commandments. Adults are, but this one is referred to as the stubborn and rebellious son who's brought to the court by his parents. Is a 30-year-old adult going to be brought to the court by his 50-year-old parents? No, that wouldn't qualify here. So we're going to be talking about an age range. What is it? From when he grows 2 hairs, right? In other words, when he begins puberty, right? 2 hairs downstairs, so to speak. This is a sign of puberty. And from which time, from that time, he's considered an adult until he has, from when he grows 2 hairs, which is a sign of puberty, and from which time he would be considered obligated in the commandments, right, if he's 13, until he has grown a beard around. Not a beard on the face, again, downstairs, right? So there's going to be this limited age range from when the first signs of puberty begin until puberty is well underway, right? And he has completed pubic hair. The reference here is to the lower beard downstairs and not the upper beard, his facial hair. But the sages spoke in euphemistic terms. That's actually the language of the Mishna. We're talking about the lower beard, not the upper beard, but the sages spoke in euphemistic terms so that they would have refined speech, even though everybody knew what they meant. As it is stated, quote, Deuteronomy 21:18, if a man has a stubborn and rebellious son, this indicates that the penalty for rebelliousness of this sort is imposed upon a son, but not a daughter, and upon a son, but not a fully grown man. A minor under the age of 13 is exempt from the penalty imposed upon a stubborn and rebellious son because he has not yet reached the age of inclusion in the commandments. Right? He's a minor. A minor doesn't qualify, and a grown man doesn't qualify. That's why I have this limited age range in between. Now the Gemara. The Gemara inquires about the source of the law taught in the Mishnah. From where do we derive that a minor is exempt from the punishment imposed upon a stubborn and rebellious son? Okay? From where do we derive that a minor is exempt? The Gemara comments, the question is puzzling. From where do we derive this law? The reason is, as taught in the Mishnah, because he has not yet reached the age of inclusion in mitzvahs. That's how we know. And furthermore, where do we find that the verse punishes a minor so that a special verse would be required here in order to exempt him? We don't need a special verse to exempt him. No minor is going to be punished for not fulfilling mitzvahs because minors are not obligated in mitzvahs. So the Gemara clarifies, this is what we are saying. Is this to say that a stubborn and rebellious son is executed for a sin that he already committed? But, as will be explained on page 71b, he is executed for what will become in the end, not for what he's already done. Right? He's a pattern of behavior that apparently is going to lead to terrible sins, and we're going to execute him before he goes there. But he hasn't committed any kind of death penalty offense yet. So the Torah understands that since the boy has already embarked on an evil path, he will continue to be drawn after his natural tendencies and commit many offenses that are more severe. It is therefore preferable that he should be executed now, so that he may die in relative innocence, rather than be put to death in the future, bearing much more guilt. And since he is executed for what will become in the end, one might have thought that even a minor as well can be sentenced to the death penalty as a stubborn and rebellious son. And furthermore, the exclusion, a son, but not a man, indicates that a minor, in fact, is included in the law, as he is not yet a man. So Rav Yehuda says that Rav says a minor is exempt from the punishment imposed on the Ben Sorer Umore, the stubborn and rebellious son, as the verse states, if a man has a son, in Deuteronomy 21:18, which indicates that the law applies to a son who is close to the stage of having the strength of a man, i.e., he is close to full maturity, but not to a younger boy. Now, the Mishnah taught that a boy can be sentenced as a stubborn and rebellious son only until he has grown a lower beard. Rabbi Chia teaches a baraisa that states, until the hair surrounds the corona. Okay, what's the corona? The corona is the head of the penis. So what's he talking about? When Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he said an explanation of Rabbi Chia's statement. The reference in the Mishnah is to hair surrounding the penis and not to hair surrounding the sac holding the testicles, which grows later. If we can just get past our discomfort with these kinds of subjects, the sages are going to apply the exact same level of analysis and scrutiny to a question of, when has a boy become a young man and when does a young man become an adult man, as they would to, how much wine needs to be used as a libation when wine accompanies some other kind of offering in the Holy Temple. And if a smaller amount than the minimum amount was brought, was the offering disqualified or is it going to be accepted after the fact? We're always going to apply this level of scrutiny. Sometimes it involves, bodily aspects, and we just have to get over our discomfort with that. Rav Chisda says, in the case of a minor who fathered a child, his son cannot become a stubborn and rebellious son. As it is stated, if a man has a stubborn and rebellious son, which indicates that the law applies only if a man has a son, but not if a son, i.e. one who is not yet a man, has a son. Could a minor father a child? Yeah, probably, right? Probably. So a boy who's less than 13 years old, especially in the ancient world where I think maybe people matured a little faster because life expectancies were shorter. A boy that young could probably father a child. But if he did, right, his son, who then, his son would be too close in age to him, and so his son could not qualify for this law. But the Gemara asks, how can Rav Chisda derive this law from this verse? Doesn't he require this verse to teach us that which Rav Yehuda says, that Rav says, namely, that a minor is exempt from the punishment imposed upon a stubborn and rebellious son? What does this have to do with a minor who fathered a son? And the Gemara answers, the verse teaches two laws. As were the mention to teach only the law that a minor is exempt, let the verse say, if there be a son to a man. For what reason does the verse introduce a change into the normal word order and state, if a man has a son, conclude from it that the verse serves to teach the ruling of Rav Chisda? This makes much more sense in Hebrew, but basically, it's the difference between ben leish or leish ben, right? Where one is more typically used in Hebrew. Since the Torah reverses that order, we can learn something from this unusual arrangement of the words. Two laws instead of one. That both a minor doesn't qualify for this, nor the son of a minor, or at least the son of somebody who fathered him when he was a minor. Now the Gemara asks, if so, say that the entire verse comes to teach us this, i.e. what Rav Chisda said, and that it does not teach that a minor is not included in the law of a stubborn and rebellious son. Why don't we just keep it to that a minor can't father a son who then is going to be characterized as a stubborn and rebellious son? And the Gemara answers, if so, the verse should have stated, if there be the son of a man. What is the meaning of, if a man has a son? Conclude two conclusions from it, both that a minor cannot become a stubborn and rebellious son, and that if a minor fathered a son, that son cannot become a stubborn and rebellious son. Now the Gemara comments, and Rav Chisda's statement disagrees with the opinion of Rabbah, as Rabbah says in connection with one who returned stolen property after having taken a false oath that he did not steal it. A minor cannot father a child. We're learning this out from another area of law, but now he's saying, I just said at the beginning of this discussion, of this particular discussion, could a minor father a child? Yeah, probably a minor could father a child, but now Rabbah is saying no. That's not possible. A minor cannot father a child. As it is stated, quote, but if the man has no relative to whom restitution may be made, let the trespass that is recompensed to the Lord be the priest. Let it belong to the priests. That's Numbers 5:8. In other words, if somebody stole from someone and he has to return what he stole, but the one he stole from has died in the meantime, okay, so then what he stole, he should be returned to his heirs. What if the man has no heirs? You have to look for them, but if you can't find them, if there is no relative, okay, then you would give it to the priests instead. How's that relevant to this? And is there any man in the Jewish people who does not have a relative? What do you mean you can't find a relative? All Jews have relatives because all Jews are related. Who could be a Jew and not related to the Jewish family at large, right? The Jewish tribe. We're all the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So who would be a Jew that doesn't have a relative? This would only be a convert, right? Because when a convert enters the Jewish family, so to speak, it's like he's an adopted child. So everyone is his relative. But for the purposes of this law, if he hasn't, after he converted to Judaism, fathered children, then he doesn't have relatives because his biological relatives who didn't convert with him, even if they did, they wouldn't be related in this sense. You can obviously have great loving relationships with your biological relatives, but after you convert to Judaism under Jewish law, they're not your relatives, right? So that's who they're talking about here. And is there any man in the Jewish people who does not have a relative? All members of the Jewish people are related as they all descend from the patriarch Jacob. And therefore, every person has a relative who is fit to inherit from him. So rather, the verse is speaking of the robbery of a convert who is treated like a newborn child and considered to have no ties to his natural parents or relatives. If he did not father any children after his conversion, he's a man with no relatives at all. And therefore, if he dies, property that had been stolen from him must be returned to a priest. Now we're on page 69a. Still wondering how is this relevant, right, to the minor who is a stubborn and rebellious son. And the merciful one states, but if the man has no relative. Well, this teaches that it is only in the case of a convert who is a man that you must go around seeking whether or not he has relatives. Like, did he father a child or not after he became a Jew? But in the case of a convert who is a minor, you do not have to go around searching for relatives. It is known that he has no relative, since a minor cannot father a child. Abaye raised an objection to Rabbah from a Baraisa discussing a designated maidservant. Right, so this is in the time that slavery, tragically, was legal in the world. Okay, so if a man bought a slave, a female slave, and he designated her to be a mate for one of his male slaves, that would be a designated maidservant. So in a Baraisa that talks about this law, the verse states, and if a man lies carnally with a woman who is a maidservant designated to a man and not fully redeemed, nor freedom given her, inquiry shall be made. They shall not be put to death because she was not free. Leviticus 19:20. Now from the word man, I have derived only that this law applies to an adult man. But as for a minor, age 9 years and 1 day, who is fit for engaging in intercourse, in other words, it's possible, not legal or desirable or something we would ever condone, but it's physically possible, according to this. This would contradict what Rabbah said, that a minor cannot father a child. This law would seem to indicate that a minor could marry a woman and have intercourse, so that sounds like he could father a child. That's what's being offered here. From the word man, I've derived only that this law applies to an adult man, but as for a minor, age 9 years and 1 day, who is fit for engaging in intercourse, from where is it derived that he too is subject to this law? And the verse states, and if a man. And this extraneous letter vav, which means and, serves to include a minor who is 9 years old, as already at that age he can perform intercourse. Rabbah said to Abaye, there is no proof from here, as even though a 9-year-old boy has sperm, he cannot father a child. His sperm is like the seed of grain that was cut even if it had not yet reached 1/3 of its growth. In other words, such seed, if planted, will not grow. Maybe he can go through the motions of intercourse, but he can't father a child at that age. A sage of the school of Chizkiah taught, the verse states, but if a man comes intentionally against his neighbor to slay him with guile, you shall take him from my altar that he may die. That's just the law of the murderer. The use of the term yazid, intentionally, if a man comes intentionally, this term is yazid, in this context, and its juxtaposition to the word man, teaches that a man can heat himself up, mezid, yazid, mezid, similar root, and produce viable sperm. But a minor cannot heat himself up and produce viable sperm. Therefore, even though a minor can engage in intercourse with a woman, he cannot father a child. Rav Mordechai said to Rav Ashi, from where may it be inferred that this word mezid is a term meaning heating up? As it is written in a different verse, and Jacob cooked pottage. This is when he cooked the stew that Esau wanted and for which he sold his birthright. And the word cooked here is vayazed, right? And that's also related to yazid and mezid. Now the Gemara asks, but did the school of Rabbi Yishmael teach the following baraisa concerning the stubborn and rebellious son? The verse states, if a man has a stubborn and rebellious son. This teaches that a son can become a stubborn and rebellious son, but not a father. So that one who has a child cannot be sentenced as a stubborn and rebellious son. Right? So once he's become a father, he no longer qualifies as a stubborn and rebellious son. So that would be, so already we know it can't be, you even though your dad is alive, if you yourself have fathered a son, you no longer qualify under the rules of the stubborn and rebellious son. Now the Gemara asks, what are the circumstances? If we say that his wife conceived after he grew 2 hairs, and the baby was born before he grew his lower beard, is there such a long interval between these 2 times to allow for the carrying of a child to term? But doesn't Rabbi Kruspedai say the entire time during which it is possible to judge and sentence a stubborn and rebellious son is only 3 months? Right? Later we're going to talk about what kinds of actions would qualify him to be a stubborn and rebellious son. How much of a glutton, how much he would have to eat, and how much he would have to drink, and how many misdeeds he would have to do. But here already, we're narrowing the sort of calendar of when somebody would qualify for this as only a 3-month period. Like when he first starts puberty, and as soon as he gets a little bit of the way into puberty, he no longer qualifies, right? The sages would want to make sure that this never happened. Because why would the Torah do this? It's almost like this law is in the Torah so that we would study it, so that we could, tell our children, you don't want to become the stubborn and rebellious son. You don't want to do that. It's almost like a warning. But in terms of actually defining it, now according to Rabbi Kruspedai, there's only a 3-month period where a person would even qualify as a matter of age. The entire time during which it is possible to judge and sentence a stubborn and rebellious son is only 3 months. The time between the appearance of the first 2 hairs and the growth of the lower beard. Consequently, it is impossible for a child to be born to the stubborn and rebellious son during this period. How could he conceive and give birth to a son in that period? Rather, is it not that his wife conceived before he grew the 2 hairs, and the baby was born before he completed the lower beard? And you can learn from it that a minor can, in fact, father a child. But the Gemara rejects this line of reasoning. No, actually, you can explain that his wife conceived only after he grew 2 hairs, and the baby was born after he grew the lower beard. And as for that which is difficult for you based on the statement of Rabbi Kruspedai, that the law governing a stubborn and rebellious son applies only for 3 months, it can be explained as follows. When Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he said that they said in the West, meaning in Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, that the term son teaches that only a son can become a stubborn and rebellious son, but not one who is fit to be called a father. That is to say, the verse does not exclude someone whose child was born during this period, but rather one whose wife conceived during this time, so that if he has a wife who he impregnated, he is already fit to be called a father even before the baby is born. Now, returning to the matter itself, Rabbi Kruspedai says that Rabbi Shabtai says the entire time during which it is possible to judge and sentence a stubborn and rebellious son is only 3 months. The Gemara asks, but didn't we learn in the Mishnah that a boy can be judged as a stubborn and rebellious son from when he grows 2 hairs until he completes the lower beard? That's longer than 3 months. Or even if it's not, it doesn't seem to be a 3-month period, very specific. Rather, it seems to indicate that his liability depends on his physical maturity and not on any specific time period. And, the time between when a boy first grows 2 hairs until he completes the lower beard could certainly vary from one individual to another. How can you say 3 months? So the Gemara answers, if he grew a beard in that area, then even if 3 months have not passed, he can no longer become liable as a stubborn and rebellious son. And if 3 months passed, then even if he has not grown the beard, he is similarly exempt. Rabbi Yaakov from Nehar Pekod sat before Ravina and let me read that again. Rabbi Yaakov from Nehar Pekod sat before Ravina and said in the name of Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, learned from the statement that Rabbi Kruspedai says that Rabbi Shabtai says that when a woman gives birth at 7 months, her fetus cannot yet be discerned after 1/3 of her days of pregnancy. What are we talking about? In a 9-month pregnancy, the fetus can be discerned after 3 months, which is 1/3 of the pregnancy. In the case of a pregnancy that lasts only 7 months, the fetus cannot be discerned at the end of 1/3 of the pregnancy, i.e. after 2 1/3 months, but rather only after 3 months, as in a standard 9-month pregnancy. Rabbi Yaakov explains the inference as, if it enters your mind that when a woman gives birth at 7 months, her fetus can already be discerned after 1/3 of her days of pregnancy, i.e. after 2 1/3 months, why do I need 3 months from the time the boy reaches adulthood until the end of the time that he can become liable as a stubborn and rebellious son? A period of 2 1/3 months should suffice. If he engaged in intercourse with a woman immediately upon reaching adulthood and the intercourse resulted in a 7-month pregnancy, the fetus would be able to be discerned after 2 1/3 months, and he would be fit to be called a father already from then. From the statement of Rabbi Kruspedai, citing Rabbi Shabtai, it is clear that the earliest time that the fetus can be discerned is after 3 months of the pregnancy have passed. Why are we even talking about this? Because we're talking about disqualifying this young man from being labeled a stubborn and rebellious son and being liable to that punishment if he has already become a father or if he has become fit to become a father. And what is that window? Well, how would we know that he's fit to become a father? Because he had intercourse with a woman and she becomes pregnant and she's showing. If it's 2 1/3 months, then it's a smaller window than if it's 3 months. Ravina said to Rabbi Yaakov, actually, I could say to you that even when a woman gives birth at 7 months, her fetus can already be discerned after 1/3 of her days of pregnancy. But the law with regard to a stubborn and rebellious son was not adjusted accordingly because of the principle that one follows the majority. Most women give birth at 9 months, and their fetuses are discernible only after 3 months. Therefore, the fact that one would be fit to be called a father in the case of a 7-month pregnancy is disregarded. The sages stated this answer before Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, whereupon he said to them, but do we blindly follow after the majority in cases of capital law and not judge each case according to its own merits? Doesn't the Torah state, and the congregation shall judge, and the congregation shall deliver? Numbers 35, 24, and 25, from which it is derived that the court must make every effort to find exculpatory arguments in support of the accused in any death penalty case. And yet you say that one follows the majority. If it is possible that already after 2 1/3 months, the stubborn and rebellious son will be fit to be called a father and therefore exempt from liability for this violation and this potential execution, then we don't care. that it's only a very small minority of cases where a fetus could be discernible after 203rd months, if that's going to be the legal device for exculpating, for removing him from this punishment, we're going to use it. The sages then brought exculpatory evidence. What's the verb of exculpatory? Somebody write it for me. The sages then brought Rav Huna's analysis back to Ravina and presented it before him. Ravina said to them, and do we not follow the majority in cases of capital law? But didn't we, exculpating, thank you. But didn't we learn in the Mishna, Sanhedrin 40a, if one witness says that the event occurred on the 2nd of the month, and one witness says that the event occurred on the 3rd of the month, this is not regarded as a contradiction, and their testimony stands, since it is possible that this witness knows of the addition of a day to the previous month, and according to his tally, the event occurred on the 2nd day of the month, and that witness does not know that the Sanhedrin met in Jerusalem and declared that the new month had begun, and so his tally of days is off by 1 day. They agree on the facts. They just, one of them didn't know that the new month had started. So their testimonies are not contradictory, and the testimony will stand. Whereas if their disagreement on when the crime happened, in a murder case, was off by 2 days or more, then that is a contradiction and the defendant gets off. And if it enters your mind to say that we do not say that one follows the majority in cases of capital law, well, let us then say that these witnesses are testifying with precision and that they contradict each other, and therefore the accused should be acquitted. Rather, is it not because we say that one follows the majority, and the majority of people are apt to err with regard to the addition of an extra day to the month? Rabbi Yirmi of Difti says, right, so now we're just arguing on, can we ever use this principle of follow the majority to establish a fact, because of the way most people are, even in a death penalty case? Rabbi Yirmi of Difti says, we learn in another Mishnah, Tractate Nida, page 44b, as well, that one follows the majority, even in cases of capital law. What's over there in Nida? A girl who is 3 years and 1 day old, whose father arranged her betrothal, can be betrothed with intercourse, as despite her age, the legal status of intercourse with her is that of full-fledged intercourse. Would we ever allow a 3-year-old girl to be betrothed? Well, in the ancient world, they would do that, right? They would say, we want two families are going to be joined together, so we're going to betroth this boy to this girl. They're not going to get married till they grow up, but we could establish a betrothal now. So that was not so uncommon. When does betrothal become betrothal, or actually become marriage? In this case, when betrothal, there has to be an exchange of something valuable. Usually it's done with money, or it could be drawing up a document, or you could use intercourse to create the betrothal, and then you would have also created marriage, right? Betrothal would take you all the way to marriage. Would any father give his 3-year-old girl to have intercourse with her prospective husband? Yeah, I don't think so. But what they're saying is, if that did happen, then that would have been intercourse, right? So all the laws of marriage would then apply, irrespective of morality, of rape, of all kinds of other issues. They're just saying that an act of intercourse with a girl even that young is an act of intercourse, and so we would call it intercourse. If she's younger than that, then whatever that was, whatever kind of abuse, rape, whatever, it would not change her status from a single girl to a married girl, and it would not constitute she would still be a virgin, etc. Right? It would not actually be intercourse if she was younger than that. That's what this law is about. And in a case where the childless husband of a girl 3 years and 1 day old dies, if his brother, right, the Yavam in the laws of Yibum, engages in intercourse with her, he acquires her as a wife. And if a girl of that age is married, a man other than her husband is liable for engaging in intercourse with her. In other words, if he did, it would be adultery, and he would be liable to the death penalty for committing adultery, because an act even with a girl that young is legally an act of intercourse. And she is legally considered to be a married woman. And the Mishnah continues, and if she is impure due to menstruation, I don't see how that's possible. I don't think a 3-year-old could ever menstruate, but I'm not a biologist. And if she is impure due to menstruation, she transmits impurity to one who engages in intercourse with her, who then renders all the items designated for lying beneath him impure, like the items designated for lying above him. If she marries a priest, she may partake of teruma like any other wife of a priest. If she is unmarried and one of the men who is unfit for the priesthood, i.e., for example, a mamzer or halal engaged in intercourse with her, he has disqualified her from marrying into the priesthood. And if she is the daughter of a priest, she is disqualified partaking of teruma. In other words, all the laws that apply after an act of intercourse, since this would be legally defined as intercourse, would apply in this situation. And if one of those with whom relations are forbidden, which are enumerated in the Torah, engage in intercourse with her, for example, her father or her father-in-law, that man is executed by the court for engaging in intercourse with her, and she is exempt. She hasn't done anything wrong because she's a minor. She was abused. Now, Rabbi Yirmiyah of Difti explains how the Mishnah demonstrates that one follows the majority, even in cases of capital law. This is all to lead us to this. Why is a man who engaged in intercourse with a 3-year-old girl who was married to another man liable to receive the death penalty? Say that perhaps it will turn out that she is a sexually underdeveloped woman, an Elonis, who is incapable of bearing children, and her husband did not betroth her with this understanding, and consequently the marriage is null, as it was entered into in error. Therefore, a man who engaged in intercourse with her should not be liable to receive the death penalty for adultery, because the marriage wasn't a marriage. Rather, is it not that we say that one follows the majority, and the majority of women are not sexually underdeveloped women with whom any marriage would then be annulled, and therefore the assumption is that her betrothal was valid. So this is proof that even in cases of capital law, we follow the majority. The Gemara refutes this claim. No. Rather, what is the meaning of that which is taught in the Mishnah? And if she is married, a man other than her husband is liable for engaging in intercourse with her due to violation of the prohibition against intercourse with a married woman? This means that if a man unwittingly engaged in intercourse with a 3-year-old girl who was married to another man, he is liable to bring a sin offering. But there is no liability to receive the death penalty based on a majority. I don't know what unwitting means in this case. The Gemara asks, but wasn't it taught in the Mishnah, and if one of any of those with whom relations are forbidden, which are enumerated in the Torah, these are the laws of incest, engage in intercourse with her, the man is executed by the court for engaging in intercourse with her. And the Gemara answers, this is referring to a case where her father or some other close relative engaged in intercourse with her, right, incest and rape, so that the prohibition is incest rather than adultery. So the Gemara asks, but wasn't it taught if one of any of those with whom relations are forbidden engage in intercourse with her, the man is executed by the court for engaging in intercourse with her? This seems to indicate that the death penalty is imposed for all types of forbidden intercourse with a 3-year-old girl, even if the intercourse is forbidden as a result of her being married. And the Gemara refutes this claim. Rather, what are we dealing with here? We are dealing with a case where the husband explicitly accepted her upon himself as his wife, even if she turns out to be a sexually underdeveloped woman, an Elonis. Therefore, and that doesn't mean that sexually underdeveloped because she's so young. This means a woman who will never be able to have children. Therefore, another man who engages in intercourse with her is liable to receive the death penalty, even if he is not one of her close relatives, because, in other words, the husband says, even if she's an Elonis, I want to be married to her, then there would be no annulment on that basis. And therefore, if anybody else, lay with her, it would be adultery, full-fledged adultery, and that guy would be liable to the death penalty for that. New subject. The sages taught in a baraisa, if a woman was acting lewdly with her minor son, and he performed the initial stage of intercourse with her, okay, incest between a minor son and his mother, Beis Shammai say that he has thereby disqualified her from marrying into the priesthood. Yeah, that makes sense. And Beis Hillel deem her fit to marry into the priesthood because they maintain that the intercourse of a minor is not regarded as intercourse. Now, I don't think any priest would marry this woman who, committed incest with her son. The only question they're talking about here is a technical legal question, is if he's a minor, then this intercourse that he committed, is it intercourse at all? Or that was committed on him, let's say. Is it intercourse at all? Rabbi Chia, the son of Rabbi Bar Nachmani, says that Rav Chisda says, and some say that Rav Chisda says that Zeri says, all, i.e. both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, concede with regard to a boy 9 years and 1 day old, that his intercourse is regarded as intercourse, and disqualifies a woman from marrying into the priesthood, as well as results in her liability to receive the death penalty, even though he himself is not liable to receive the death penalty, even if he was a willing participant, because he's a minor. And they all concede concerning a boy less than 8 years old that his intercourse is not regarded as intercourse vis-a-vis these laws. It's just not considered an active intercourse. They disagree only about a boy who is 8 years old. As Beis Shammai maintained that we learned from earlier generations, when people were able to father children at that age, and we apply that reality to the present. And Beis Hillel maintained that we do not learn from earlier generations. And the Gemara asks, and from where do we derive that in earlier generations men fathered children at this early age? If we say that we know this from the following calculation, it is written, quote, is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah, the Hittite, or Uriah, right? But Uriah, the Hittite, or the Hittite, from 2 Samuel 11:3. And it is also written, and Eliam, son of Achisophel, the Gilonite, in 2 Samuel 23:24, which teaches that Bathsheba, right? Bathsheba, who would become David's wife and the mother of King Solomon, that she was the granddaughter of Ahisophel. And it is written with regard to the birth of Solomon, and he sent by the hand of Nasan the prophet, and he called his name Yedidiah for the Lord's sake. 2 Samuel 12:25. And later it is written, and it came to pass after 2 years that Absalom, David's son, terrible rebel, had sheep shearers. And at that time Amnon was killed, this being at least 2 years after Solomon was born. And afterward it is written, so Absalom fled and went to Geshur and was there 3 years, so that this was 5 years after Solomon was born. And it is written, is a long way around to calculate ages in the book of Samuel. And it is written, so Absalom dwelt 2 years in Jerusalem and did not see the king's face, bringing the tally to 7 years after Solomon was born. And it is written, and it came to pass after 40 years that Absalom said to the king, I pray you, let me go and pay my vow, which I have vowed to the Lord in Hebron. So this was the beginning of Absalom's rebellion against King David. Accordingly, at that time, Solomon was at least 7 years old. And at some point during the rebellion, it is written, and then Ahisophel saw that his counsel was not followed. He saddled his donkey, and he arose and went to his house, to his city, and put his household in order, and he strangled himself and died. And it is written, bloody and deceitful men shall not live out half their days. Psalm 55, verse 24. And in keeping with this verse, it is taught in a Baraisa, all of Doeg's years were only 34, and Ahisophel's were only 33. Neither reached the age of 35, which is half of the normal lifespan of 70. So based on this, it's a lot of givens to make this calculation. Given that. Okay, now we're finally arriving at it. Based on this, one can calculate, how many years did Ahisophel live? 33. Subtract 7 years, which was Solomon's age at the time of Ahisophel's death, which leaves Ahisophel 26 years old at the time of Solomon's birth. Subtract 2 more years for 3 pregnancies. One preceding the birth of Eliam, the son of Ahisophel. One preceding the birth of Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam. And one preceding the birth of Solomon, the son of Bathsheba. So it turns out that 3 generations were born in 24 years. And that each and every parent begot a child at the age of 8. Gemara doesn't buy this. The Gemara refutes this proof. From where do you prove this? Perhaps both Ahisophel and his son Eliam fathered children when they were 9 years old. And Bathsheba gave birth to Solomon when she was 6, because a woman is stronger and can conceive at an earlier age. And know that this is true, and women can conceive at an earlier age than men, as Bathsheba had already given birth to a child from David before giving birth to Solomon. Therefore, no proof can be derived from here. Rather, it is from here that one can deduce that in earlier generations, men fathered children at the age of 8, as it is written. And these are the generations of Terach. Terach begot Avram, right? This is who became Abraham. So we're talking about Abraham's father. Terach begot Avram, Nahor, and Haran. That's Genesis 11:27. And Abraham was at least 1 year older than Nahor, and Nahor was 1 year older than Haran. So it turns out that Abraham was 2 years older than Haran. And it is written, and Abram and Nahor took wives for themselves. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, right? Sarai who would become Sarah, Abram who would become Abraham. And the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and the father of Iscah. That's Genesis 11:29. And Rabbi Yitzchak says Iscah is in fact Sarah. And why was she called Iscah? Because she envisioned, Shesocha, hidden matters by means of divine inspiration. Sarah was a prophetess. And this explains what is written. And all that Sarah has said to you, hearken to her voice. That's God talking to Abraham and saying, listen to your wife. All men should. Alternatively, Sarah was also called Iscah because all gazed, Sochim, upon her beauty. And it is written, and Abraham fell upon his face and laughed and said in his heart, shall a child be born to him that is 100 years old? And shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, give birth? Genesis 17:17. So how much older was Abraham than Sarah? He was 10 years older than her. As stated above, he was 2 years older than her father, Haran. So it turns out that when Haran begot Sarah, he begot her at the age of 8. But the Gemara is not buying it. And it refutes this proof. From where do you prove this? Perhaps Abraham was the youngest of the brothers and not the oldest. And the fact that Abraham is listed first is no proof that he was the oldest, as perhaps the verse listed them in order of their wisdom, and therefore Abraham, being the wisest, was mentioned first. And know that it is true that the verse sometimes lists brothers not according to their birth order, but in the order of their degrees of wisdom, as it is written, and Noah, right, Noah, was 500 years old, and Noah begot Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And according to this, Shem was Japheth, right? And Shem was at least 1 year older than Ham, and Ham was 1 year older than Japheth. So it turns out that Shem was 2 years older than Japheth. And it is written, and Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters was upon the earth. Genesis 7:6. And it is written, these are the descendants of Shem. Shem was 100 years old and begot Arpachshad 2 years after the flood. And if Shem was the oldest brother, how could he be only 100 years old? He must have been at least 102 years old, as Noah was 500 years old when his third son was born, and he was 600 years old at the time of the flood. So rather, the verse listed them in the order of their degrees of wisdom, Shem being the wisest. With regard to his age, Shem was the youngest of the brothers, having been born when Noah was 502 years old. Shem begot his son 100 years later, which was 2 years after the flood. Here too, then, with regard to the sons of Terach, it can be argued that the verse lists them in the order of their degrees of wisdom. Rav Kahana says, I stated this discussion before Rav Zevid of Nehardea, and when he heard it, he said to me, you learned that Shem was not Noach's oldest son from there, and we learned it from a different verse. And to Shem, the father of all the children of Aver, the brother of Japheth the elder, to him also were children born. Genesis 10:21. And this indicates that Japheth, rather than Shem, was the oldest of the brothers. Gemara asks, rather, from where do we derive that in earlier generations, men fathered children at the age of 8, which we haven't proven yet? From here, as it is written, and Betzalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Yehuda, made all that the Lord commanded Moses. This is the children of Israel in the wilderness. Who was Betzalel? He was the craftsman appointed by God to supervise the construction of the tabernacle and all its implements. Betzalel was singled out by God as a master artisan and artist and craftsman. And it is written, and Azubah died, and Caleb took for himself Ephrat, who bore him Hur. And Hur begot Uri, and Uri begot Betzalel. And when Betzalel made the Mishkan, the tabernacle, how old was he? He must have been at least 13 years old, as it is written, and all the wise men that carried out all the work of the sanctuary came, every man from his work that they did. Exodus 36:4. And one who is less than 13 is not called a man, and it is taught in a Baraisa. In the first year following the Exodus from Egypt, Moses made the Mishkan, the tabernacle. In the second year, he erected the Mishkan, and he sent out the spies to see the land. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. And it is written that Caleb, Betzalel's great-grandfather, said to Joshua, I was 40 years old when Moses, whose birthday is today, and I should have said this before, thank God we're mentioning Moses now. Today is Moses' birthday and his yahrzeit, because he died on his birthday, which is a sign of tremendous righteousness, and no one was more righteous than Moshe Rabbeinu. So let us dedicate our learning today, Lilu Nishmas, for the elevation of the soul of Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher, the greatest prophet the world has ever known. Here we're talking about Moses. Okay, says Caleb, speaking to Joshua, I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land. That's Joshua 14:7. And he added, and now, behold, I am this day 85 years old. So how many years old was Caleb when he was sent off with the spies? He was 40. Subtract 14 years, as Betzalel was at least 14 years old when Caleb was sent to spy out the land. This is known because that mission took place a year after the Mishkan was erected. This leaves 26 years. Subtract 2 more years for 3 pregnancies, 1 preceding the birth of Hur, the son of Caleb, 1 preceding the birth of Uri, the son of Hur, and 1 preceding the birth of Betzalel, the son of Uri. And it turns out that 3 generations were born in 24 years, and that each and every parent begot a child at the age of 8. That would also go a long way to explaining how the Jews, in a few hundred years, went from a troop of 70 people, like Jacob's clan, that went down into Egypt, and depending on how you count, but probably 210 years later, emerged from Egypt 2 million strong. If they were having a new generation, every 8 years, that would help explain that. That's my comment. Now, the Mishnah teaches that the penalty, back to the Ben Sorer Umore, the stubborn rebellious son. The Mishnah teaches that the penalty for rebelliousness is imposed upon a son, but not upon a daughter. And it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Shimon says, it would be reasonable that a daughter should be fit to be treated like a stubborn and rebellious son and to be punished like him if she sins in the same way he does. And the reason that all are found frequently with her in sin, and in the end she will be a sinner and cause others to sin. But it is a Torah edict that the penalty for rebelliousness is imposed only upon a son and not upon a daughter. There's no bas sorer umore. It's only ben sorer umore. Only the stubborn and rebellious son could even theoretically qualify for that punishment. And that completes our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 8. We're at the top of 70a, where we'll pick it up tomorrow night, God willing. But basically, in this first chapter, we established just minimum requirements, for it even to apply, that it's only a son and not a daughter, and that it's only at this age, right between the first 2 hairs and the full beard down there, maybe only 3-month period. And we define what a minor is and isn't, and it's time to move on. Okay. Just a few questions. Ilanit, if a boy is too young to be considered to have seed mature enough to qualify his action as true intercourse regarding potential for the death sentence, etc., is it then just fornication? Any penalty? If he's so young that, it's not even considered intercourse, there's no penalty for him because he's a minor. We're just asking, did intercourse happen so that the person involved with him would be guilty of that. No. So in other words, I guess what you're asking is if somebody committed terrible sexual abuse and it was an adult with this boy younger than 8, and did some, let's say this woman did something with this young boy, and it's not intercourse, right? So they didn't get married. It wouldn't be adultery, right, for her if she was a married woman. But what would it be? It would be exactly, maybe it's fornication, maybe it's just under a different law. It would certainly violate a prohibition. And, if wherever this was, it was laws against sexual abuse, those laws would apply, but that's outside of Torah law, right? Here they're really talking about, would the Torah require a death penalty for that and all these other related status changes? Sharon, how could Bathsheba be so young when she conceived with David, given that David was smitten by her beauty and she was already married at the time when she was bathing on the roof? Very good. And I would say that Gemara didn't get to that as the counter argument, but it had other counter arguments to rely on. This would be a good one to say, what are you talking about? She couldn't have been that young for these reasons. And then maybe they could have found some technical way to counter argue against you, but this would be a good one. And finally, yeah, that was answered. Okay, so that's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we're together again tomorrow night, Motzi Shabbos, after Shabbos. Last few weeks has been like about 7:45 or by 8 anyway. And then after that, late Saturday night, the clocks will change, and then things will be a little bit different in the following week. That's what we've got. Although it'll, still Sunday to Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific, and then it'll be noon on Fridays, and it's just that Shabbos will be ending later, and that's when it starts to get difficult for people on the East Coast, who I'm always in awe of midsummer when you guys are learning past midnight to start the class. Good Shabbos, and may we only hear good news as we enter Shabbos and as we leave it. We say Amen.